So where was I? Oh, yes, right. So wherever people were previously, they had it all ironed out, and they want to bring that to their new employer, right? But we know that that's not really the truth, right? We know that's not how things really are. Problem is, we don't have any strategic business teams that are positioned to look holistically across the business and advocate for the employee's experience, right? We just pile solution on top of solution on top of solution. And you say, well, who's there to stop this? That's the problem, right? There is nobody there to stop this. There's nobody playing this role. And I'm willing to bet that if we polled our IT friends, they would say, thank you. We've been saying for way too long that we need business guidance. But the business sort of cheats that, right? So first question I often get is, well, why isn't this IT's job? Well, listen, I love my IT colleagues, right? So I say this with peace and love, and I will continue to shower love. I get your plight. But we need to stop asking IT to be what it isn't, right? IT serves a good function, a necessary function. And if you know IT people, if you know technologists, you love them. But they're not necessarily the person that you want to put in front of your VP to have a conversation about why a thing works a particular way. Maybe that's not a nice thing to say, but I don't mean it in a bad way. The fact of the matter is that's just the reality. And yet, we continue to set them up to fail. If you think about the tools that most of us are managing, your intranet, your workplace, your Yammer, your enterprise collaboration spaces, there's nobody positioned to manage these at an enterprise level, right? I mean, as communicators, we've sort of gotten the intranet. People are like, yeah, that's right, you should get that. But what about something like Teams, right? If you're deploying Microsoft Teams and Teams are just sprouting up left and right and suddenly people are getting messages from all over the place, now you're competing with that channel. And if you take a step back far enough, you can look at Teams and go, actually, in its own way, there's a content management, sort of an architectural component to this. And this is the space where we as communicators are really perfectly positioned because we see it. We know how we communicate to the business. Do we communicate to a retail audience separate from how we communicate to our corporate audience? Do we communicate to one brand differently than we communicate to another brand? Right? There's all these different ways that we communicate. How do we communicate to leadership? Well, our IT folks aren't positioned to know this. So how do they know what teams should really get set up, to use the Teams analogy, right? They're also often not positioned to have a holistic view. So somebody comes in and they say, well, I want to use Slack. Well, they don't realize that on the other part of the business, there's some VP who's got the money and he or she is going to implement, I don't know, something else that competes with Slack, right? And then there's another part of the business and they're all using Google because Google's just the best and they love it. Well, now you got three separate things out there. And then eventually what happens? It all comes back to IT, right? We need to make this available for everybody. Everybody needs to have Slack. Everybody needs to have Google. Everybody can't have everything. Because at the same time, what do we also know? Employees are overloaded, right? And then there's another reality too, and that's that, unfortunately, IT is rarely empowered to say no, right? If you're the right person and you have the budget for your own team, IT can't step in front of that freight train and say, no, you can't make that investment. Sorry, you can't have a license for you and your 15 people to use Slack together. Rarely, right? At the end of the day, the business needs to step up. The business needs to define what it wants and partner with IT to give it what it wants and stop hiding behind IT. So from my perspective, I think of this as digital workplace management. Okay? I'm a communications professional. I've been in communications my entire career. But I've also always been sort of the guy who understands technology and sort of can speak to the digital teams. And so that's put me in this unique position to kind of see this. So I'm advocating for digital workplace management to be a function. Maybe it should sit in communications. Maybe it should sit right next to communications. I'm not going to try and make that case. But we need this, right? Somebody's got to provide strategic business advice and advocate for the employee experience, because there's no one else positioned to do it. So when we think about ourselves, like, who are the folks who fall into this bucket? And I feel like talking to intranet people, like, we're our people, right? I started as an intranet guy, and it's sort of, that scope has expanded, right? We're the folks who understand technology. We ride that line between technology and the business. But too often, I think, because people hear digital, because they hear technology, organizationally, that function gets put into IT. And over time, what happens? It gets compartmentalized, it gets devalued, and then when times are tough, what do? Well, do we really need that? We need the people who are doing coding, who are doing the true technology, and then it just dies on the vine. I've seen it happen. And I'm willing to bet a lot of you have seen it happen as well. Right? So I always like to use that phrase. We ride the line between the business and technology. So what kind of people are we? And I suspect this is going to resonate with a lot of you, right? We're business focused, we're business minded. But we just sort of have a natural love for technology. I'm a tinkerer. You know, I'm doing a thing later on talking about Legos. That's just me. That's why I'm the guy in the comms team who got put on the enterprise portal and content management, because that's just what I love to do. And I find that there's often folks like that in communications, right? We manage the intranets. We maintain relationships with IT, right? And very often I find myself in these meetings and I'm like the translator. It's like I'm listening to the person on the business side, I'm listening to the technology teams, and they think they're talking, and I hear something and I thought, wait a minute, you know, Jane from IT, when you say it's going to do this and that, you're not saying it's going to do this other thing too, right? No. And then the person, oh, wait, no, hang on a second. I totally misunderstood what you were saying, right? We play that role. We also understand data and systems, and that's why we can play that role. So when we look at metrics, when people want dashboards, it's like we're the ones going, yes, it would be great if the system could tell you whether you liked your breakfast this morning or not, but I'm trying to figure out how we're going to make that actually, how am I going to get that data into a system that something can analyze? Right? So understanding data, understanding how systems work together so you can think about that in the broader context of metrics and dashboards. And then perhaps most importantly, we understand and love our IT colleagues. It's like I see their plight, you know, and I've seen so many times where unfortunately I think they become their own worst enemy because they're being asked to do a very particular thing, solve a very specific problem. And they say, well, if we do this and that and the other, we can solve for that problem. And I'm going, that's going to solve for this specific problem right now, but you're changing things in such a way that tomorrow or in a week or in a month, you're going to have a much bigger problem on your hands. You're starting a snowball and you don't realize that that's going to snowball and become a bigger issue. Right? So we play that role for them and can help understand on the business side the need to say, well, sometimes you need to push back on the business and say, well, you can't necessarily have you can't have that right away because that's going to break things down for everybody else. So what do we do on a day-to-day basis, right? I'm not going to read through all of this, but you can look and see some of the high points, right? We work with our employee experience colleagues, right? Very often employee experience sits in HR, but we partner with them, right? Here's what you're going to get from a digital experience side, and how does that affect your employee experience overall? We create a cross-functional digital workplace governance team that I'll talk about in a little bit, and we lead that. We lead innovation. So if someone comes and says, we need Slack, you say, well, hang on a second. What do you need Slack to do? Okay, got it. Let me do some research and see, do we already have that capability? Or is there some solution out there that might be the best solution for it? And then do that research. Because right now it's being done by anybody and everybody who's interested or who gets the phone call. Thinking about analytics. And then I want to talk too about community building and content management, right? So if I look back, I think my roots really started in content management, right? Managing my first intranet, this is 20 years ago, okay, right? All of a sudden there's this concept of we're gonna create a tool that you don't have to be in IT to manage websites. And you're going to have to start managing that content. Okay, well, what you get into as you start centrally managing content is you realize you slowly create a community of content managers, right? And that has just expanded over time collaboration tools where people are posting and responding. There's a lot of environments there. If you're using a workplace, if you're using a Yammer, how do you create a sense of community for people so that they trust these spaces, that they want to engage in them? And who's really tasked with doing that? Right? So I assert that if you're the content manager, you're already positioned to kind of be that person. You're likely to be the person who knows the answer to their question or knows where they should go to get the answer to that question. Right? You're just sort of naturally the right fit. And then lastly, training and proficiency. Now, I want to be cautious about this because I'm not trying to take training over. I don't want all training. But when we talk about proficiency, there's something to proficiency. When employees are overloaded, when employees come and ask for applications because they need a particular thing done, they need a particular capability, oftentimes we actually have that capability already within our digital suite somewhere. They just don't know it. Right? And employees tell us that. In surveys we've done, in interviews we've done, they tell us, we don't know what we don't know. At the end of the day, I didn't know that our intranet had that capability. I didn't know that I could do that in Teams. I didn't know that Excel let me do that, right? Basics, but not so basics. One of the assumptions that I like to challenge is people often will say, business leaders will often say, we need something really intuitive. I don't need instructions on how to use my iPhone. We need something intuitive like that, right? You're like, yeah, but you sort of do need instructions on how to use your iPhone. I get it, you know the basics, right? You can make a phone call, you could send a text, sure. But give it to your teenage kid. Can you do all the things that they can do on the iPhone? Nearly as quickly as they can do it? There's a ton of capability that exists that the average person doesn't know and never uses. Whether they need it or not is, I guess neither here nor there. If they knew it was there, would they use it? Yeah, maybe. But when we think about our digital tools and our digital suite, we can really apply the same lens, right? There's a lot of functionality out there that people don't know. And if there's not someone out there educating folks and not just saying, hey, here's how you sign into Excel. No. It's like, you want to do something deeper. Okay, maybe you want to use, I'm making this up, Microsoft Planner, in conjunction with a space within Teams. But someone who understands what those capabilities are and can help you piece together solutions so we get the most out of the investments we've already made digitally. Right? So what do we manage? Right? So we really manage all these communication, collaboration tools from an enterprise perspective, so across the spectrum. So we deal with all our brands, all the regions. So we have one overarching view. Mailing lists, like distro lists. So we work with IT on our distro list. What's populating Active Directory? Why aren't our distro lists going to the right people, right? Your intranet. I put in here training and proficiency and also innovation, of course. And then there's a whole component of what we influence, right? So when I say we own digital tools, it's not every digital tool. Something like your HRIS system, that's got a clear business owner, right? They have business advocacy. We don't have to worry about them. If you have a financial planning application, I guarantee you, your finance team is on it, right? But we can influence some of those things because there's interaction. So do we influence the HRIS system? Do we influence our ticket management system? What about our learning management system? There are interactions between our systems, right? So there's some influence happening there. So I mentioned this Digital Workplace Governance Council. So this is one of the first things that we've done to really gain traction and gain visibility and understanding across the business as to what we're doing. So we've created this team. It's a cross-functional team. It's got representatives from IT and also from the business. It can't be too big, otherwise you just can't do anything. But if it's too small, then you're working in a little vacuum, right? So it's got to be the right mix of folks. And this becomes your intake funnel for new technology requests. So somebody wants to deploy Slack, what are the capabilities you want? And partnered with that is developing a methodology, and this is really important, for assessing and analyzing capabilities, right? So let's get out of the space of saying the interface on Slack is so much better, the interface on Google is so much better, or whatever it may be. Let's not talk about systems. Let's talk about capabilities. And if we have an inventory of the capabilities we have across the business, and an understanding of what capabilities the business wants, then we can also quantify them, right? What's the business demand? What's the perceived business value? What's the cost or burden of maintenance? Because you can't forget that either, right? That's important. All these things. How do you factor them and then chart them in some way so you can be making strategic decisions? What are my low-hanging fruit that are going to give me the most bang for my buck? So having these meetings on a regular basis give us that visibility and give us some discipline. And that will help us ultimately simplify the ecosystem. Get rid of so many redundant systems. Talked about proficiency and training. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. I think we kind of touched on this well enough, right? But we all know that this is an issue. People just don't know how to use the systems we've already got in place. I think that about wraps it up. Yeah, so just in summary, right, this is kind of a new way of looking at what many of us do and expanding the scope of what many of us do. So it edges outside of purely communication collaboration, really kind of gets into the true digital workplace perspective, right? Let's love our IT partners. Let's stop setting them up to fail. Let's step up and be the business leaders and provide the strategic guidance that they need and that they want. And I would recommend, if you're really looking to start something like this, start by creating a council, a governance team. Just a couple of conversations. I guarantee you, if you meet with somebody in IT and you tell them that this is your vision, they may hug you, okay, if they're not too freaked out by it, because they're clamoring for real partnership from the business. Right? I think that's it. Thank you so much. I think we have a couple of minutes for Q&A.
So that's fantastic. Thank you very much. So quite a few things resonated there, but that piece around connecting the dots and, again, understanding the software capabilities you got and then making the most of what you got really drew through for me. So going to try and get some questions from the online audience as well, if there's any coming through. But in terms of the audience, any questions? So is it at the front here? Gamze, have you got the mic? Got the audience mic at the front?
Yeah. We want the folks online to hear it.
Oh, okay. So, great presentation.
Thank you.
I am curious if you've talked to Gartner about this, because a couple of the analysts there are talking about a digital workplace leader. The only thing that kind of differs from their definition of it is ServiceNow, which they've dumped over to somebody else. But have you had, because that's often the big challenge, are you finding traction, or have you gone to any of the analyst firms? Because I 100% agree with you, but the question is, how do we make the title ubiquitous?
Got it. So short answer is actually, yeah, we did work with Gartner about a year ago for about 3 months. And the governance council was one of their recommendations. I will say, to our credit, it was something we had already kind of teed up, but that gave us, the sort of clout to say, the leverage, so that we could say, okay, it's not just us. They're telling us this is one of their recommendations, and so that was really helpful. Yep. And you're absolutely right. They were all over the whole digital workplace, methodology concept. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. And any other questions? Do we have any questions from online?
Nope. Okay.
Great. Oh, one at the back.
If you're not in the IT department, where does your digital workplace live?
Yeah. So I'm part of communications. So we have a chief communications officer now. We didn't previously, so we used to be part of HR, but now we do, and it makes a lot more sense. Whether we belong as a communication function or not, I think remains to be seen for the time being. I think it makes the most sense. It helps people put some scope around what we own and what we don't. So we don't own ServiceNow. We don't want to own our HRIS system, but communication collaboration and anything relating to that, we do. Whether that evolves or grows over time, I think may change in the coming years as technology just further evolves and things get further integrated. Maybe I could see a day where perhaps it is something that actually sits next to communications, but for the time being, I think from my perspective, it makes sense. As communicators, I just feel like it's kind of our wheelhouse. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
More at the back.
So quick question, and since you said you came from working under HR, in your previous slide, how do you go about with your onboarding process? Because I think that's where, like you said, when we have new employees come on board, they come from what they knew and what worked,
Yeah.
but it's educating them on the programs or platforms or processes that that we have. And so how have you made that transition with new employees?
Yeah. So, I mean, the short answer is we haven't, right? So, I mean, we do, we have, of course, onboarding training and orientation. But right now we're in the space where we're recognizing that it's insufficient. And that's why people are, you know, they're more open to this idea of proficiency and applying resources to making sure training is holistic and that people have training for things that they've already got in-house. So it's a gap that we recognize, and actually our VP of Employee Experience, it's her project for the next year is to improve that onboarding experience.
Great. So we're all out of time for questions. Yep. Thanks for all your interaction, and thank you to Dante for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.